I've got one more thing I want to talk to you about. I don't have notes on this.
It's okay.
So this may be something that I use in the future, but I've got this wacky idea I want to run by you. All right. So I've got the beginning of an idea here, and I'm trying to put more and more pieces of it together. You know, I've been talking. I did an interview with Dr. David Peck, with Corey Stevens.
Yeah.
I did an interview series with Corey Stevens, and I've been following Kara Wagner's work. She's doing the UBO, the unhealthy brood odor stuff.
Yeah.
And I've been following Randy Oliver's work. And I've got this idea that testing is the key to the path forward on Varroa mites.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you my hypothesis here. The key to what Randy Oliver is doing is not his experimentation with mite treatments. That's beneficial, it's useful, it's great. But what is really key to his operation is he's testing every single colony, and he's integrating IPM, integrated pest management, on every single colony. So he is not treating hives that don't need it, and he is treating hives that do need it. Therefore, you don't get the robbing frenzy that sends mite bombs out into your population, and you keep selection pressure on hives to exhibit resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And host resistance is what he's looking for. The problem is that almost nobody can afford to do mite washes on 1,000 colonies multiple times per year. So most beekeepers, even running sizable outfits, especially running sizable outfits, I'd say, might spot check 10% of the hives in a yard. And that's a problem because you can't keep the selection pressure, you can't do the IPM on a per hive basis to try to breed these host resistant bees. So my thought on it is I'm set up on screen bottom boards. I'm using oxalic acid vapor, and I sort of stumbled on this by accident, but if you shoot a hive with oxalic acid vapor, you get a mite drop from the entire hive. And you can see really quickly, this hive has a lot of mites, this hive has very few mites. You don't know why, you have no idea why. That they could have host resistance, they could have gone through a brood break, they could have swarmed, they could have, who knows. But you can grade them out real quick and then go in and say, I need to integrate IPM on this one, it had too many mites, and they're not going into my breeding program. This one is going to get into my breeding program, and I will consider it as a breeder. You can take it into a second level. What Corey Stevens is doing, looking for VSH, is the Harbo assay. So he is picking off the cappings of 100 brood cells that are just nearly going to emerge, and he's looking for reproductive mites. He's looking for baby mites under those cappings. And if he doesn't get a good enough sample on 100, he's got to go to 200 to do it. Incredibly time intensive to do that. You can't scale that. So what Kara Wagner has got coming out, and Michael Palmer has been testing this. He's in the test group. You put a piece of PVC on a brood frame, spritz it with unhealthy brood odor.
I saw a lecture on that. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Very interesting. And then you go back in 2 hours and see which ones are exhibiting VSH. So I'm thinking that if we can get better testing that is cost effective and quick and easy and gives us good enough information, then you could even take a sizable outfit and do maybe a second tier or a 2-tiered testing regimen and breeding program and actually move the needle and kind of adopt what Randy's doing. And
you could. I think a big key to that would be artificial insemination. You need the drones.
Yeah.
And use that semen to artificially inseminate your production queens that go into the field. But yeah, that's a pretty good idea, this idea about checking what's falling out of the screen. That's a pretty easy way. You might not have the precision that Randy Oliver does, but how much easier is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty good idea there, Nathan.
So, and I'm not saying that that's the answer, but it could be part of it. Like, I think testing is the key to it all. And are there different ways to test? You know, scorpions fluoresce under black light, or some scorpions do. Are there ways to detect mite counts in a hive that are easier or faster? Or
well, I would predict that within the next 10 years, and I don't have any information to say this, I just think it's so. 10 years from now, there's going to be so many more techniques and mechanisms for doing all of this because everybody's so focused on the mites right now. I predict a lot of stuff will come out of the woodwork that'll, work in the way you're talking about, ways of testing, ways of figuring this out. And then back to your first statement, does it matter, the mechanism that makes a mite resistant?
I don't know that it does.
I know Corey's on the VSH, and that's great. But, what about the James Bond method, live and let die method? I mean, does it really matter which way works as long as it works?
See,
and your bees are productive and gentle?
The beauty of what Randy Oliver's doing is he's got these bees that are exhibiting resistance, but if you have a treatment-free yard and you have one hive in there that doesn't have resistance and it gets overwhelmed by mites, well, through robbing, it can crash your resistant colony. They can get a mite load that is so high that their resistance is overwhelmed and they succumb to it.
It can, and I had that happen to me somewhat some years ago. I had 2 yards that had been no treatment for 7 years, both of them. And part of the key is, and this isn't talked about often, part of the key in my view is to split from the bees that survived because you're using the same mites. If you continuously put pressure on the mites, you're breeding a super mite.
Yeah.
If you take the pressure off, suddenly the mites are a little less virulent too. So one of the keys in my view to having an entirely treatment-free population of bees is to not in no way be introducing fresh mites. Anyway, in these 2 treatment yards, I started off, I lost most of the bees the first year. I split from colonies that survived, and a little better the next year, and a little better the next year. The last year, I had like a 75% survival rate, no treatment at all, nothing. I did nothing. I didn't even know why they were mite resistant. And then a beekeeper moved in close to both of those yards. In one case, he was only 300 yards away. He didn't treat till October. He used Apivar. A lot of his bees crashed. And my bees, of course, went over and robbed his colonies out and brought these fresh load of mites in. And the next spring, every colony in my yard was dead.
Yeah.
So that's something to be considered.
They were
too.
Resistant, but they got overwhelmed by those virulent strains
virulent strain of mites,
and a lot of them too.
Yeah. They had mites. I could see mites on the bees in these colonies. I'm like, how come this colony isn't crashing? Why isn't it sick? When you can see mites on the bees, you've got a heavy load of mites.
Yeah.
Maybe they were just really virus resistant. I don't know, but they were making it until a man moved in real close to me and crashed my whole program.
That's interesting.
I was giving queens to Dan Purvis and to Jennifer Berry. They were using my stock as mite-resistant stock, and I was glad to do it for them too. In case of Jennifer, I just said, you just go in there and get the one you like. Whichever colony's the best, you just take her. And of course, she's kind of lost track of that program, and Dan did too. Dan went out of business, but at one time, he was one of the only people in the country advertising a survivor line of bees, and he was using, in some cases, my bees.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then he was people were complaining because they buy queens from him and then say, well, my bees are crashing, and that furthered my understanding of that you need the mites to go with the bees.
Yeah. It's interesting.
I think I would suppose Randy does, right? He's splitting from his own outfit.
Yeah. He's
in the Sierra Nevadas, probably isolated from other beekeepers.
And he's doing mite washes and lots of them, but he's actually building machines to shape the mites.
It even made me wonder, if you sat down and did the math, what if you had 1,000 colonies and you just hired one person and all they ever did, their job was to do mite washes? It might take them weeks to get through the outfit and then go back to the beginning and start again. Would the payoff be worth the salary you're paying that person? And I haven't answered that yet. It's possible it would, actually. It could possibly be viable financially to do that. with all the things you're going to save if you know what your bees are doing and which ones you to breed from and all of that stuff.
Well, what got me thinking about this is Corey and Dr. David Peck were both saying we need more mite-resistant queen breeders and mite-resistant queen producers. And then I was thinking, but the only way you can get there is either running a treatment-free yard or doing what Randy Oliver's doing. Well, how can you do what Randy Oliver's doing but easier?
And again, back to treatment-free yard. You know, once your queens are exposed to some other mites, maybe your queens aren't working so good. That was my experience.
So it's interesting. I think easier testing methods are going to be the key.
Somebody asked me about American foul brood. When I lived in Oregon, I saw it from time to time in other people's bees. I didn't have a problem because I was administering terramycin on a regular basis, kept the symptoms at bay. But I also saw people that weren't doing that in Oregon and that were having AFB problems. I don't see it in Georgia. Since I've come here, I rarely hear about it, and I've never seen it in my bees. And somebody asked me, why do you think that's so? And I just wonder, I don't know if this is an answer, I wonder, you know, the bees that we were working with in 1981 are not the same bees we're working with today. Our population has persisted through a lot of pressure. First, trachea mites. Yeah. You know, our current population is somewhat resistant to trachea mites, so that had to happen. And not just the Varroa mites themselves, but all the viruses that are vectored with the Varroa mite situation. And so our bees have had this pressure and have evolved somewhat. And I'm wondering if we have enough hygienic behavior and enough resistance to this and that somehow the bees themselves are doing better than if we took our bees and took them back 40 years, how much better would they do? Or the reverse, if you took the 1981 colony and put it in 2023, it'd probably crash in a heartbeat no matter what you did.
I think they might. Beekeeping used to be easier than it is now.
So easy. Easy.
Bees in a box.
Bees in a box, yeah. I only requeened when it was obvious that they needed a new queen. I never tried to requeen anything on a regular schedule. But nowadays, if you don't pay close attention to your queen somehow, in some way, you end up with a lot of non-productive colonies. It wasn't that way in 1981.
Bob, I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, this is fun. I know you're going to have to edit out a lot of odds and ends. I kind of got off down rabbit holes that weren't part of your subject matter, but it was been a lot of fun.
I think it's been great.
Are you hungry?
Yeah, sure.
It's straight up noon. Let's go have some lunch.
Okay.
You can clean up all this stuff when you get back.
I'll just turn them off.
Just turn them off.